our election. I'm joined now by Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. He was part of that hearing as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And by the way, he's also a member of the Senate's Select Committee on Intelligence, so he's as well briefed as anybody on this issue. Senator Cotton, welcome back to Washington. Happy New Year and great beard.
Thank you, Chuck. Happy New Year to all your viewers. I decided to grow a beard in honor of Tony Kornheiser, not just to make it orange, and maybe he'll have me on the radio show.
There we go. A little cheesery to you. Let's start with this. There seems to be a bit of a gulf inside just the Republican Party. You got John McCain referring to what Russia did as an act of war. Donald Trump says nobody knows. What do you say?
Well, I believe the October 7th intelligence assessment that Russian intelligence services or their affiliates were behind the hacking of the DNC and John Podesta's email. We still need to wait for the report that's going to be released imminently to see what they have to say about the motive for those decisions. But I would also say that this is just one small example of a pattern of aggression that Russia has committed against the United States and our interests for many years, going back at least 15 years since Vladimir Putin took office. And what we need to do is to focus on drawing new boundaries on Russia, not just about this small instance of Russian aggression against U.S. interests, but so many others. Running illegal spy rings in our country, beating our diplomats on the steps of our embassy in Moscow, giving weapons to rebels that could shoot civilian aircraft out of the sky, intervening in Syria and bombing our supported forces there. So this is just one part of a long pattern of Russian aggression against U.S. interests.
Everything you just ticked down there, are you concerned that President-elect Trump would basically be dismissive of what you just said?
I'm not concerned about it. I hope that he appreciates the kind of aggression that Russia has undertaken, especially in the last 8 years. But I'll make a point to you and your viewers that I made at the Armed Services Committee today. Donald Trump campaigned on increasing our defense budget, on accelerating our nuclear modernization, on expanding ballistic missile defense against adversarial nations, and accelerating oil and gas production, which is very harmful to Russia's petro economy. All of these things fundamentally changed the strategic calculation for Russia as against the United States. So it's not clear to me why someone would think that Donald Trump would be the favored candidate of Russia. Hillary Clinton was opposed to all those things. So I'll be looking forward to seeing the declassified version of the report that comes out in the next few days, but also on the Intelligence Committee going forward with our very careful review of this entire matter.
But should motivation matter here? You know, in some ways, I mean, I feel like it should that. I think that perhaps this is the problem, that even the president-elect gets caught up in this idea of, oh, it's an attempt to delegitimize the election. Well, if Russia was getting involved, that shouldn't matter. What should matter is what are we going to do about it, correct?
Chuck, so you got the motives of Vladimir Putin and his intelligence services. Those are always hard to know. As I asked Director Clapper today, and he confirmed, trying to learn the motives and the intentions and the plans of foreign leaders about any topic is the hardest thing we ask of our intelligence services. But then you've got the motives of some Democrats and some in the media who are using phrases like hack the election or hacked into our electoral process. That is creating the confusion among some that somehow Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence services manipulated vote totals. And as was said repeatedly today, there's no evidence to support that at all. We need to focus on the actual facts at hand, which is that Russian intelligence services or their affiliates hacked into the DNC and John Podesta's email. Whatever the motive was for that, they ought not to have done it. They ought to pay a price for it. I think that price should be stiffer than what President Obama imposed last week. But that's a policy that I've had going back 4 years now in the Congress of trying to draw a firmer line against Vladimir Putin's aggression against the United States and the United States allies and our interests abroad.
Well, it's interesting you bring up retaliation. Let me play for you what your colleague Lindsey Graham, an exchange Lindsey Graham had with Clapper today. Take a listen.
When it comes to interfering in our election, we better be ready to throw rocks. Do you agree with that?
That's a good metaphor.
I think what Obama did was throw a pebble. I'm ready to throw a rock. Is this going to stop until we make the cost higher?
We have got to change the dynamic here because we're on the wrong end of the cost equation.
Yeah, you got that right.
All right. What's the rock as far as you're concerned, Senator Cotton?
Well, Lindsay may be willing to settle with rocks. I'd move on to boulders, though. I've long advocated a across-the-board approach to Russia that puts more pressure on them. The Obama administration has frequently said they compartmentalize issues with Russia. Ukraine on the one hand, Syria on the other hand. They may compartmentalize it. Vladimir Putin does not. And simply because we face, for instance, a cyber hack here doesn't mean that we have to respond in kind with that. We might, for instance, provide the defensive weapons that the Ukrainian military has been asking for so forcefully for so long. We might crack down on the travel of Russian spies here in the United States that aren't supposed to be leaving their embassy under existing rules, but the Obama administration has let them do so, presumably so they can conduct further espionage. There's a whole host of options that we have for drawing a firmer line on Russia. Some of those are bilateral, like I just outlined, but some of them are moving forward with Donald Trump's proposals, like building up our military or expanding missile defense and our nuclear arsenal, or accelerating the export of oil and gas now that we're one of the world's largest producers.
Let me go to Ukraine, though. You brought up Ukraine. Let me go to that a minute. What happens? There's been some chatter that President-elect Trump is perhaps willing to dial down the sanctions that were imposed due to the illegal annexation of Crimea. Obviously, Europe has never been. It's been hard to keep those European end of those sanctions in place. If there's any wavering by the U.S. president, those things are going to fall apart. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I've been concerned about the sanctions that were imposed after the invasion of Crimea for almost 3 years now, because, as you say, the greatest source of wavering has been the European governments, and some of those governments have recently changed and expressed more skepticism towards them. I think it would be inadvisable not to renew those sanctions when they're next up in a few months, at least in return, not getting anything substantial in return. So I think that would be inadvisable, and that's not the path I would take.
One final question, domestic, and I say very quickly, and healthcare is not a quick subject. How are you comfortable with the idea of repealing Obamacare before a replacement is ready to go?
Well, Chuck, I think you have to distinguish when you talk about a replacement when it's enacted and when it takes effect. Obamacare itself was enacted in March of 2010, but some measures didn't take effect for a few years. I think that we as Republicans need to coalesce and pass a solution that solves the problems that Obamacare actually made worse. Now, that may not take effect until, say, the open season of 2018, because you need to provide for an orderly transition. But I think it would not be the right path for us to repeal Obamacare without laying out a path forward, even if that path, say, transitions gradually over the next year to 2 years.
But you're saying you're not going to vote, you're not comfortable voting on a repeal without at least something concrete in place that people can see.
I think when we repeal Obamacare, we need to have the solution in place moving forward. Again, that solution may be implemented in a deliberate fashion, but I don't think we can just repeal Obamacare and say we're going to get the answer 2 years from now. Look, this is a very complicated problem. Healthcare is a very complex issue. We haven't coalesced around a solution for 6 years, in part because it is so complicated. Kicking the can down the road for a year or 2 years is not going to make it any easier to solve.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas. Appreciate you coming on. Nice talking with you,
Thanks,
sir.
Chuck.